Welcome to the Ranch Workforce Project, a limited series collaboration between the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program, a project to address the domestic labor shortage on farms and ranches, a project to replenish the pipeline, a project to attract new people into an old industry, a project to face what has to change from within. Because the future of agriculture doesn't just depend on land and livestock, it depends on people. And now, your host, Haylie Shipp.
And welcome to the Ranch Stewards Podcast. I am your host, Haylie Shipp, and we are doing something a little outside of the box as we kick off the new year. We are doing a limited series collaboration podcast between the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program. Why, you ask? Well, Rachel Frost is going to tell us. Rachel, you are with the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program. You are one of the brains behind making sure that we have a ranch workforce ready, willing, and able to meet ranchers, become ranchers, be the next generation out there on the ground. And you started to notice that we maybe are missing a few of the pieces in connecting the dots. And so tell the audience kind of what was the catalyst for this.
Yeah, absolutely, Haylie. The catalyst for this is because the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program finds ourselves right in the middle of that gap between this eager, interested, and talented generation that's coming into college and wanting to find careers, and they're all interested in agriculture, and they're interested in ranching in particular, but they lack experience. But then we also find ourselves on the other side of that, working with ranchers, trying to pair these students with internship hosts. And we're seeing ranchers that some of them are really good at employing inexperienced students or young people and helping them to develop professionally, while others just seem to miss the mark on it. So in working in that space between these two important components of the labor pipeline, we're starting to see some patterns and things that work and things that don't work. So we wanted to bridge that gap and provide some resources to the ranching community for how they could help to bring in these young people, how they could help to develop them, make it profitable, beneficial for the ranch, and get some benefit out of it. But then also to help manage the expectations of the young people that are coming in so they know what it's really like to have a career in ranching.
You know, we're going to get into, Rachel, kind of what we've got lined out for the season here shortly. But one of the things that you said is that oftentimes we see folks with these romanticized expectations of what ranching is really going to be like. And it's part of your job to make sure that they're not thinking it's all just unicorns and sunshine all of the time. So how do you help to let folks know that reality while also not dampening their dreams too much?
Yeah, that is a big challenge. I think the biggest part of my job is managing expectations of these students because they all have that idealistic dream of working on a big cattle ranch, riding horses all the time, moving cows, and picturesque scenery. But we know that's not the case. So I'm constantly giving that dream killer speech that's also tempered with the fact that ranching is largely a daily grind, but then there are big days and there's big fun stuff that you can get to take part of, but you can't ignore that daily grind and you can find satisfaction in that. That's when you understand the context of where those chores like fencing and haying and irrigating fit into the overall context of the ranch, then they become less of a grind. And it helps students see how those contribute to that overall goal of being able to essentially live that lifestyle that they are really dreaming of.
Well, we're going to be starting to kick these podcasts out late January, early February, and we've got this series of 10, and we may end up doing extras as we get in there because it's kind of the people that you and I are. Sometimes we get to dream and we go a little bit bigger. So we're going to say 10 for now is what we've got slated. We're going to start out talking about the state of the ag labor pipeline in the United States and just what the actual situation is. So Rachel, we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but what are we going to look at more specifically in this episode?
This episode is going to just get to the nuts and bolts of the issue. There is not a single agriculture industry that is not recognizing labor as one of at least their top 5 challenges that are facing us as an industry. So, why are we seeing these challenges? Where did the holes in the pipeline of labor happen? And how do we start putting patches on those holes in realistic ways? How is policy and how is just what's happening in rural communities contributing to this lapse in the pipeline? And how can we start to refill that? That's what we're going to talk about in that issue.
And then next up, it's not just ranch hand anymore. It can be an intern, it can be a seasonal worker. There's all of these different titles that can fill this pipeline, right?
Absolutely. And all of those titles come with expectations, both on the employer side and on the employee side. And so understanding truly what is the difference between an internship, an apprentice, seasonal labor, that's going to help us manage the expectations on both sides and be very realistic about what your ranch can expect from someone who's entering into that position. And then also what kind of commitment you're going to have to give to that person as far as what they're expecting to gain from an education and an experiential learning standpoint.
So, our third episode is going to be about what makes the ideal ranch employee. And you've got Dr. Trey Patterson lined out. Big hitter there. Talk to us about Dr. Patterson and where he comes to us from.
He is the CEO and president of the Padlock Ranch. And the Padlock Ranch is one of the leaders in the industry. They have 5 elements of purpose that drive their everyday management activities. And one of those elements of purpose is excellence in people. So what Dr. Patterson is going to talk to us about is how the Padlock first hires the right person by understanding what characteristics are truly important to them, how they mix and prioritize soft skills and hard skills when they're looking for that employee that really has potential instead of maybe all of those ideal characteristics right off the bat. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation because they have just taken understanding those characteristics of what's going to make an employee to the next level.
This next one I'm really excited about, and it's about, you bring a seasonal employee on, you onboard them and you set them loose, and then you get aggravated if they maybe aren't doing the job that you thought that they were going to do. And then you realize you really probably needed to hold their hand a little bit more because, as you've identified, oftentimes this new workforce is coming in inexperienced. Not their fault that they don't have that background necessarily, but they need you to teach them. And so we're going to talk about avoiding frustrations in that situation and how we can do that. Nobody wants to be frustrated, Rachel. What are we going to learn in that section?
No, frustration is definitely not what we're after in this situation, but you're right. It happens all too often. And of course, the frustration or the culprit of frustration is generally a breakdown in communication. As ranchers, we're so familiar with what we do on a day-to-day basis that we can be tempted to go from A to K and skip those critical B, C, D, E, F, G steps along the way. And so we're going to remind folks about not jumping to conclusions about what people know and how do we truly assess what their skills are, what their comfort level is in working alone, how do we set them up for success and to be safe in the workplace. And Aaron Paulson has supervised over 60 seasonal employees during his tenure as a ranch manager. So he's going to bring that experience to this conversation. And I'm really looking forward to learning directly from such a star in the industry who's helped to mentor so many young people.
Next up in episode 5, it's sort of that like red flag of employers. And it's if they always have the hiring sign out, because even when they fill something, the next person is leaving. And so we're talking about the meaningful work that people are after in today's day and age, and how to make sure as an employer that you're providing that type of work. That's something that you're seeing, I'm sure, from your students. They're after that sort of work that means something at the end of the day.
They absolutely are. They want to know, what is that ranch doing? How's it contributing to the food supply? How's it interacting with the local community? And if you can keep them involved and abreast of what's going on the ranch, they are so much more likely to stay there and to really buy into the mission and the vision that you have as an operation. So Chris Redmond is going to talk about the culture of a ranch, how a mission and a vision statement really sets the tone for that and is the foundation for developing culture. He's also going to talk about the flip side of that, and that is what is bad culture on a ranch and what types of management decisions do we make that are really driving employees away and limiting their retention. It costs a lot to continually replace employees. So this could be a really big, important part of the conversation to help ranches with the employment issue.
Let's talk about burnout next. What does this look like in a ranching environment?
Well, we don't like to talk about burnout in ranching and agriculture, right? Because we're tough and we don't experience that. But we both know that's not the truth. And the 24/7, 365 lifestyle that we sometimes brag about in ranching is just not sustainable. And it's really not when we have employees that don't have that ownership stake in a ranch. So how can we structure our business so that we're still being efficient and we're still being cost effective, but we're not continuously asking our employees to do more with less and contributing to that burnout?
Episode 7 is about creative ways to compensate your employees. And this is where we can get a little bit maybe romantic about the lifestyle because getting to live in this is part of the compensation.
It is. I mean, no, hardly any other occupation allows you to have the views and just the idyllic setting that working on a lot of ranches does provide. However, you got to pay the bills at the end of the day. We're talking about younger people that have families and that have expenses. And, gone are the days when you could pay people very small wages and just have passable housing. But it's also not all about the paycheck. It's back to that meaningful work. And so how do you balance that where you pay people a livable wage, but then you can find other ways to also compensate them for their efforts, incentivize them to do a better job and to be more situationally aware all the time while they're there. So Kendall Cross is a consultant with Red River Ag Consulting. She specializes in helping ranches develop HR programs that really work for their situations and employees. And she's going to talk about beyond a paycheck, what can we do to help incentivize people, give them a sense of belonging to that operation that gives them a little bit of skin in the game and helps to keep them there and keep them really motivated to do a good job for us.
The next podcast you've got titled Ranching, the Business That Skipped a Generation. Tell me what your intention is with this one.
Well, this kind of comes from some of my personal experience. So not that the crow's feet in the picture doesn't already date me, but I am a child of the 70s and 80s. And what was happening in the 80s? It was a drought. We had high interest rates. It was a time that ranching was not the most attractive career. And my parents included encouraged a lot of us to leave and go find other careers. That's why I'm sitting at a desk in academia. But a lot of my counterparts chose careers in tech. And maybe we're in Denver or Silicon Valley. But now our kids are in college and they're looking at careers and they may have ties to agriculture and they're wanting to come back to that lifestyle. And they're also ready to leave the cities and the urban areas that they grew up in. I see this a lot in the students that are coming in to Montana State University. And so we're trying to find ways to help facilitate, how do we have an inexperienced generation that wants to come back to a family operation that has maybe skipped a generation? Because I'm not going back to my family's ranch. And is there ways that we can do that and help those students gain the experience, but also provide some tools to that older generation that stayed there and kept the ship afloat for all these years and are ready to step aside?
Up next, we're going to talk about Ranch Boot Camp, which is really that on-the-ground project to make sure that these students not just know about, breeding seasons and, looking at different genetic traits in cattle and how that might go on and doing their labs and such, but that when they walk up to a gate, they actually know the right strategy to get that thing open and that they know what to do when they have a flat tire out in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone coverage, and that they know that how to handle those physical things that are going to be challenges out on the ground. It's a partnership between Win It Aces and ourselves, as well as you there with the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program and also with Montana DNRC. We're going to talk about that program there in episode number 9. And then in episode 10, what's so sexy about ranch management? I always love when somebody can work the word sexy into anything about ranching. So kudos on the title for that one. Rachel, what are you thinking for what's so sexy about ranch management?
Ranch management is the hottest degree out there in agriculture right now. I want to say they're all copying Montana State because we had the first true undergraduate program in ranch management with, offering that 4-year Bachelor of Science in Ranching Systems. But those types of programs are coming up at universities and colleges all across the nation, and they're being flooded with students who are interested in it. But they're also all saying that there is a need for that on the ground. And I think it's true on both accounts. The students are really after that applied experiential learning. They don't want to be inside. They want to be out doing things on the ground with animals and working on the landscape. And the universities are seeing that a lot of our ranches are changing hands, and they're going to non-traditional purchasers who don't have a background in ranching. They're needing experienced people that can come in and not just have the hard skills of riding and roping, but can also understand how they can manage the finances, how they can hire people, how they can do project management, how they can handle the legal aspects of permitting and leases. So I think it's good that there are so many universities that are recognizing this. I just hope that as they move forward, that these universities are really paying attention to what are those barriers of entry, what are the things that those students really need to know so that they can effectively manage ranches, either for the family or for these non-traditional landowners that we're seeing all across the West now.
Thank you to Rachel Frostigan, the brain behind this project, and we're excited to have her along for the ride. The groundwork has been set. The Ranch Workforce Project, a collaboration, limited series podcast of the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program at Montana State University. We'll talk more about both of those organizations as we continue on with this discussion. But for now, you can tune in and catch the first formal episode of the Ranch Workforce Project right here on the Ranch Stewards Podcast, Tuesday, February 3rd.